Welcome back. Now, the arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by U.S. forces has sent shockwaves through Latin America and far beyond, raising urgent questions about international law, sovereignty, and how far major powers can go in the name of security. Reactions are still pouring in, from street protests to sharp political warnings, as the world tries to make sense of what comes next. Now, to help us unpack the implications, I'm joined by Dr. Benjamin BARTON, Head of School and Associate Professor in the School of Politics at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Ben, thanks for joining us. Now, I want to sort of unpack this before we get into the politics. Let's ground this for viewers. How extraordinary is it in modern international relations for a sitting head of state to be arrested this way by another country? Your thoughts?
It's quite extraordinary, to be honest with you. It's not something, obviously, which happens very often. Usually what we've seen over the past 2 to 3 decades is arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court, which the members or those who recognize the Rome Statute would then choose or choose not to implement, depending on the movement. You know, if we think of the likes of President Bashir from Sudan, Putin, or Netanyahu. But actually, you know, these are quite rare occurrences. Here, we're talking about a law and order action, which is specifically stated as such by the US, and not an act of war. That's what the Trump administration wants us to believe. And the actual arrest of Nicolas Maduro as a result. So it is something which is rare, but at the same time, it does also take us back to instances of, you know, US meddling in the affairs of other countries, going all the way back to the interventions in Iraq, you know, with the ultimate arrest of Saddam Hussein. And also, you know, further back, if you look at the Cold War period and closer to the US, you know, meddling in the likes of countries like Chile, Honduras, Nicaragua, even small Caribbean states such as Grenada, you know, had the US Navy show up in the 1980s following a student protest. So this is, in a way, there is form to this, not to the arrest, but to the US actively involving itself in the domestic politics of its neighbors in the Western Hemisphere. And this despite of the fact that, you know, President Trump himself had been very critical in the past of, you know, interventions by the former George Bush Jr. administration. In fact, only recently, President Trump called this a mistake, an error, a blunder in the history of US foreign policy. And yet today, on a somewhat different scale, we're seeing something similar happen.
Now, supporters say this was a law enforcement action. Critics call it a violation of sovereignty. Now, from an international law perspective, where does this sit and why is it so contentious, Ben?
Well, obviously, it's contentious because it's violating some of the key principles established by the United Nations Charter, which are the respect for state sovereignty and the non-interference in the politics of sovereign states, those who make up the international community. But there's also other reasons why it's contentious, because first and foremost, you know, President Trump has again circumvented the powers of Congress. He has set a very dangerous precedent, because what happened there with President Maduro, you know, it could happen elsewhere. I can imagine that there are leaders around the world, such as, you know, countries like Cuba, Iran, leaders in Greenland, and maybe others who are wondering, you know, what happened to President Maduro could possibly happen to them. And also, you know, the rationale is, as you mentioned, is stated as a law and order exercise. And the purpose for this here, as stated by the Trump administration, is to fight narco trafficking. On the one hand, there have been all these, you know, attempts to stop the movement of drugs in the Caribbean and off the Venezuelan coast. There's an issue around human smuggling and human trafficking and the movement of migrants from Latin America to the United States. It's been framed as a national security issue. But the thing is, you know, where does US jurisdiction stop? If that's the justification, that it's a domestic security concern and that, you know, President Maduro is going to face the courts in the US as a result, does this mean that, you know, US jurisdiction can override the jurisdiction of other sovereign states? I mean, that's a huge question mark. And also, I guess, finally, what about, you know, the thoughts of the Venezuelan people? You know, it's again being framed as something for the greater good of those people because of the the debatable nature of the President Maduro's track record. But does everyone in Venezuela agree? And in fact, now what we're going to see is pockets of resistance which are already shaping, pushing back against the US's attempts to run the show, as I'm quoting the Trump administration, in Venezuela.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Ben, when you talked about the precedent and what does it set and what does it state about powerful states acting and how do they act in the future. Now, public diplomacy versus hard power. Let's talk about that. Washington says this was about drugs and security, but images matter, and so does perception. Has the US strengthened its global standing here or complicated it with this move?
Well, clearly the US is we do seem to be reverting somewhat back to the kind of age of great power politics and, the global hegemon, in this case, the United States, stamping its authority, trying to kind of redirect world politics in a certain direction. So in a way, this is part of the Trump administration's attempts at doing that, kind of strong arm politics, direct interventions in foreign countries. We've seen that elsewhere as well. With Iran, with Nigeria to some extent, now in Venezuela. So, throwing a US weight about to remind the rest of the international community that, what the US wants to pursue, it will pursue. And it's not international law or the principles of the UN Charter which are going to stop the US from doing that. I think just to mitigate that argument a little bit, there are other factors we need to take into account. One is that Trump is also doing this because there are interests beyond national security. One is the interest of certain parts of his electoral base. So we saw the vast support provided by the Trump administration to Netanyahu for Israel and the campaign in Gaza and beyond, giving Netanyahu a free reign effectively. That was also done in part to appease part of Trump's electoral MAGA base, right? And we can say the same, I think, for Venezuela, because there's a Latino electoral base which also votes for Trump, which is anti-communist. Some come from Cuba, some come from Venezuela and from other parts of that region. And I think he's also trying to appease that. If you see the statements made by Marco Rubio, who's the Secretary of State and also the interim national security advisor, he said that this is, for the good of the Venezuelan people. So clearly, there's also that element at stake as well. And as many commentators have pointed out, Venezuela, it's not lost on the fact that when it comes to oil and gas, the oil and gas industry in the US, which largely sided with Trump during the 2024 elections, Venezuela, it has one of the largest reserves of petroleum in the world. And Chevron is, still active in Venezuela, despite the acrimonious relationship between the US and Venezuela over the past 2 decades. So I think, that's not lost on the fact that those interests are there for the Trump administration. And I think it's tried to position itself in a way as, coming to the rescue of the Venezuelan people because of the large discontentment, public discontent around Maduro's leadership, the multiple riots almost every year, there are various protests, and the fact that, during the first Trump administration, Trump tried to implement regime change without the use of force, and that failed because he supported Juan Guaido to try and succeed Nicolas Maduro in 2019. That failed. Guaido then self-exiled himself to the United States. And of course, we know that the current Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Maria Corina Machado, is also Venezuelan. She's also the laureate of the EU Sakharov Prize for 2024. So I think it does show that there's some, the international community recognizes that there was an issue in Venezuela. And I think the Trump administration is obviously trying to take advantage of that by trying to, position themselves as the good cop in this instance.
Now, let me widen the lens for a moment, Ben. We've also seen Israel recognize Somaliland against strong regional opposition. Are we entering a phase where power politics is increasingly overriding international consensus? And should smaller states be worried now?
Well, I think in the case of the United States, this precedent is a little bit worrying. I think we can't deny that because of the military might of the United States and its power projection, which I think is, unmatched in the world, obviously. I think in the case of Israel's recognition of Somaliland, let's add a bit of regional context here. It's more of a regional issue. It's got to do with Israel's survival as a state, which drives a lot of Israel's actions over the past couple of years. First of all, Israel's aim in Somaliland is to build up, friends in the region around the Red Sea area, because of course Israel's made many enemies through its actions over the past couple of years, so it needs more friends, and Somaliland potentially is one of those friends. But I think more looking at strategically, Somaliland offers a naval base and a drone base, which is very close to Yemen, where you have the Houthi rebels, who also are persona non grata for Israel. And the two of them are exchanging missiles over the course of the past year. So Somaliland has an important port of Berbera, which is being developed by a company called DP World, which is an Emirati company. The Emirates has a close relationship with Somaliland, as does Ethiopia. So in a way, Somaliland's recognition has also kind of important regional geopolitical connotations. And Israel is looking to tap into those for its own national security interests. So I wouldn't say that this has really got kind of global repercussions as such. It's more of a regional issue.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that, Ben. And that wraps up this segment. And thank you so much, Dr. Ben Barton, for sharing your thoughts with us. We'll be taking a short breather right now. When we come back, we have more stories.